Hey guys, welcome to a new episode of Player's Perspective, the interview series where I talk to fellow YouTubers and those involved in geek culture and get to know them a little better. My guest today is a prominent member of the competitive gaming community. He's been an eSports personality, host for MLG, and a lover of tabletop games, to name but a few. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome JP McDaniel. JP, welcome.
Yeah, glad to be here, man. I'm excited to talk about esports. I haven't done so in quite some time, so it should be a good talk.
So, you are a content producer on YouTube, where you do Let's Plays, role-playing games, such as Dungeons and Dragons and others. You've also hosted your own Real Talk interview series with esports personalities, as well as hosting your State of the Game podcast. But you also have a background in journalism, and you have a degree in communication arts. So was that the original plan, to become a journalist?
Kinda. I think college for me was more something that I did just to make my parents happy. No one else in my family, at least my immediate family, has a college degree, so I kind of just got that to basically serve a purpose and make my parents happy. In terms of why I did that or what the plan was, I guess getting a communication arts degree is pretty easy. It's not the hardest thing in the world by any stretch of the imagination. And it kind of tied in back before I actually started writing like esports articles for Godfrag, which I guess is where I got my break back in the day. I actually wrote for their console portal, which was called D-Pad. And I think one of the first things I ever wrote that got published online was a review for Kingdom Hearts 2 on the PS2, believe it or not. And so I kind of enjoyed that, and I've always been a fan of just gaming journalism, kind of in a grand scheme of things. Going back to the days of OneUp.com, huge fan of everything that they did there, from the OneUp show to just the print and the pieces, the reviews that they would put out, the blogs that they would put out. So I guess from the start it was to be a video game reviewer, and esports kind of happened. I'd always been interested in it. I was going to QuakeCon since I was 13 or 14, so I'd kind of been around that. And then Starcraft 2 happened. I guess I started with World of Warcraft first and kind of made that, or helped that become an esports. I didn't make that at all. I just kind of joined everyone along for the ride with MLG, but started out in WoW, and then went into Starcraft 2, and then left Starcraft 2 and kind of left esports recently. But yeah, I think the plan from the very beginning was to review games for someone, which was not a good plan because that was an industry that at the time was just dying. So I'm glad I didn't go down that path.
So you mentioned Gotfrag, which is where, as you said, got your start, and that was a blog for esports news, and that became absorbed into MLG. So what would you say is it about esports and the competitive scene that really sucked you into it?
I think kind of back in the day, I was more interested in the stories and in getting interested in learning about the players. Obviously, watching matches and everything was super fun, but I enjoyed hearing kind of the side stories, and I think that was something that kind of brought about real talk in terms of learning about the players themselves, because I'd always been a fan of that. But for me, the interesting part of esports, and really just competition in general, is learning about the competitors themselves. I'm real interested in that side of things, more so than maybe the matches most of the time.
And in terms of, there's obviously a lot of debate about esports versus more traditional athletic competitions. So how would you say esports stands in its, so-called quote unquote legitimacy in comparison to, say, conventional sporting events?
I think that both sides kind of have their pros and cons there. At the end of the day, I'm not sure it's really an argument that even needs to be said. People in esports are going to obviously watch and follow esports, and if they want to argue against traditional sports fans, then by all means they can do that. But at the end of the day, like the conversation and the argument, the debate really doesn't benefit either side. It's more just people trying to kind of verify what they're doing or what they're supporting. At least from my point of view, that's where I think the debate comes from. You can read there's thousands of articles out there, and it even goes as far kind of inside of esports for people to debate if esports is even what esports is. Is it competitive gaming? Is it the FGC? So I think a lot of time people are just trying to defend and kind of promote their community, which is totally fine. It's totally a cool thing to do. If you're passionate about something, you're gonna argue with it and debate against it or with it. But is there something that needs to be said in terms of traditional sports? Probably not. I think down the line you're just going to see more people start accepting it as time goes on, and eventually the debate won't really even be there, and it'll just be accepted. I think money is also a factor when it comes to like mainstream appeal. You saw the International 4 this past weekend, or rather 2 weeks ago, I think. Has it been that long? I think it's been 2 weeks. But you saw the fact that ESPN threw it up on ESPN2 for a pregame show, didn't even show the matches, and a lot of that probably had to do with the fact that there was around $10 million for the prize pool. So for TV and traditional mainstream media, money says a lot. So I think as that continues to grow, you'll start to see more people accept it kind of from a mainstream perspective.
And you mentioned with your State of the Game podcast wanting to get to know the players behind it. So do you ever think about how like their well-being when, say, their time is up in the spotlight, so to speak, and what will happen to them afterwards?
You're talking about esports competitors?
Yes, like a life after esports for these players.
Sure, yeah. The life, I guess, of an esport competitor is definitely shorter for the most part. I mean, we still see most people are probably dipping out around early 30s to 30 to 40 range is probably a good quitting time. And it's not that far off from traditional sports. 40 is usually the tipping point for most sports. I think football might even be younger, but I'm just pulling those stats out of my ass, so who knows if that's actually correct or not. But yeah, I think that as those players in those esports players or competitive gamer players kind of drop out of that, there's always going to be a need for commentators, and no one knows the game better than the players. I mean, we've seen traditional sports kind of adopt that, and you see a lot of charismatic sports players and I guess big names go into the commentator's chair. People like Charles Barkley has a huge following now on TNT. I think Shaquille O'Neal is actually starting to do it, and they can offer insight that no one else can, right? So that's kind of where I think you're going to see a lot of esports players turn into personalities. Much like In Control, I think he's probably the perfect example, and probably someone that has adopted that philosophy better than anyone else out there. Maybe Grubby as well is also another good example. They both are fantastic players as well as personalities and casters.
So when you started your work for MLG as someone who was really got into the scene and wanted to write as much as you could about it, was that like the pinnacle for you, getting to work for the organization that hosts all these national and international events?
MLG was kind of an interesting, I guess, thing to say or to start out with. Right when they bought GotFrag back in the day, we had all kind of known that it was going to be happening behind the scenes for, honestly, I want to say for 2 or 3 months. We just didn't know when. And when it happened, a week before it happened, I actually ended up taking a job from Game Riot, or Amped Esports at the time is what it was called, from Samuel Lingle, who was the editor-in-chief over there. He's probably one of the best writers in esports history, in my opinion. But I took a job with Amped Esports. They became Game Riot, which was a part of the World Series of Video Games, which was actually a huge competitor. And there was actually a lot of bad blood, I guess you could say, between WSVG and MLG back in the day. A lot of it had to do with players, Halo players and whatnot, because Halo was featured at a couple events of the WSVG. And it was always really weird, like, covering MLG with that. But I think that was kind of when I started to realize that I guess I was climbing the ladder a little bit. And then after I ended up leaving there as the managing editor for about a year, working remotely for WSVG, I still had a lot of my contacts from MLG that were working at in the GOT frag world. Lee Chen, I think he was the senior VP at MLG, and Mark Turner, who was I forget his title at MLG. He was basically the broadcasting guy. He was the director at one point, and he kind of switched roles from time to time. Titles never really mean much in esports. It's more in the professional world where people actually care about that. So who knows what they actually mean in esports. But around that time, I started to do. I'd always been to MLGs, but I had never been behind the scenes or been a part of that process to where I could just kind of walk backstage and say something, and then I would have people go and do it as a producer. So I think it wasn't around the time when I actually started hosting MLGs where they needed someone to kind of go out on stage and talk about what was going to happen or introduce the players or something like that. That was probably where it was kind of like I guess I'm in the thick of this, and it was a little bit shell-shocking. The moment where I probably was at the pinnacle, I guess if you want to use that word, was when I cast at BlizzCon, which I think was BlizzCon 2011. That was definitely kind of the top of all of it for me, and I think from there it only went downhill in terms of my interest in esports.
So when you decided to leave, was that on your terms and you wanted to move into other ventures? When I left, I guess the story behind that is MLG. I was working remotely in Galveston, Texas, which is a little bit east on the coast of Houston, and I'd lived there for a year with MLG's as a full-time employee. Myself and Mark Turner, who was also from Galveston, put on a couple shows, including State of the Game as well as some other tournaments from that studio in Galveston, which also happened to be my apartment. And after about a year or so, MLG decided to go ahead and close that, and they wanted to bring me in full-time in New York. And I've lived in Texas my entire life. I'd been to New York I think I stayed up there for about a month straight when we were doing some of the MLG arenas. And the decision was kind of a decision that was up to me. It was, do I want to move to New York at this time in my life, or do I want to go and try something else? Who knows what that something else is? Who knows if there's even something else out there? So I ended up making the decision to stay in Texas and not go with MLG. I think a lot of people were under the impression that I got fired, but it was definitely mutual between the two of us. I wasn't going to move to New York, and for MLG to keep me remotely in Texas was kind of pointless because they brought everyone in-house in New York, and it just wouldn't work. You can only do so much from Skype with a video or with a webcam attached to it. So that was pretty much the ultimate reason why I ended up quitting. I didn't want to move to New York, and they were totally going to facilitate all of the needs. I could have lived in New York on my own terms and not had to suffer in any way. So it was just didn't want to live there. So I decided to take off and see what else was out there. Well, home is home, so if you want to stay where you are, then
exactly,
it's your choice.
Yeah, exactly.
So, JP, in terms of the overall scene and the games involved for their eSports competitiveness, Starcraft 2 and League of Legends are considered like the big dogs of the yard. And so, what other games would you think that are up and coming, or and I suppose to add to that, Dota 2. What other games would you say that have potential for that scene?
I mean, I think that kind of at the base level, esports or competitive gaming or whatever you want to call it, really just comes down to is this interesting to watch? And for me, I enjoy watching a ton of different esports. I've watched League of Legends. I've watched Dota. I really enjoy watching fighting games. I watched Evo this past 2 weeks, or I think it was 2 weeks ago, something like that. I absolutely love watching that every year. I think the fighting game scene offers something that no other game really can with how those games are set up. And I wouldn't even say that they're smaller. I would put them right in line with Dota 2 or League of Legends or Starcraft. But apart from, I guess, more traditional esports games, there's some other stuff out there that's interesting to me. I feel like esports has become a buzzword in like traditional video game development, and a lot of people are tagging it in games that necessarily doesn't need it or necessarily is forcing the idea. And I think it was Cliffy B most recently in a Reddit AMA where he was talking about will his new game with his new production company Boss Key be esports focused. And he had a really good point of saying that, like, the hope is that it is, but that never really happens from game developers making a game that's esports focused, right? The hope is that your game is good, it's tight enough to where something like that can exist, and then that the community itself kind of makes that happen on its own. And I think that's exactly what happened with League of Legends, with Dota 2, with Starcraft 1, Starcraft 2 especially. Eventually, developer support came in, obviously, to help fulfill those dreams of having an esports title. But it really just comes down to, like, is your game something that people want to watch, or is your community passionate enough that they want to be able to play it on a competitive level? So with that in mind, I think whether it could be like a real esports, probably not, but something like watching competitive battle royale, which is an Arma 3 mod. If you think along the lines of DayZ or even the Hunger Games, that's exactly what it is. That would be a lot of fun. I think that can create some really intense situations and can play out with some rather interesting situations as well. But trying to think what else. I mean, there's competitive gaming really in almost anything. I mean, I even watched the Pokemon World Championships like a month ago on Twitch. So with the advent of Twitch, I think you're going to start to see a lot more kind of on the outlying edge of the video game sphere come into the world of competitive gaming. And I'm all for it. I love watching games of all types, and I love watching people that are really good at video games.
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier fighting games and offering something that other genres can't. And so if you take, for example, comparing, say, Street Fighter 4 to Starcraft, and obviously those are two very different genres. One is a fighting game, and the other's more strategy focused. And so, does that place one above the other in terms of its audience, or does it come down to individual preference?
I mean, maybe. I think that it's kind of getting into like apples and oranges, and it really comes down to the person in terms of what they want to watch. I think that fighting games have a one-up over something like StarCraft simply because of the first glance complexity of something like that. When you look at a StarCraft match, you really don't have any idea what's going on if you've never seen it before. You see a lot of moving things that are alien in nature, and you don't really know what's going on. Someone will probably explain, well, this army has to kill that army, and the players are controlling all of it, and you still don't really have an idea of what they're under control of, if they've actually built that. It's a very hard game to look and understand at first glance. And on the flip side, you look at something like fighting games where you immediately know that there's two players. One of them is controlling the guy on the left, the other one's controlling the guy on the right, and the goal is to beat the shit out of one another. And that's something that someone understands right off the bat. I mean, everyone knows what boxing is. Everyone knows nowadays, at least, what the UFC is. Everyone knows what a fight is. So you look at a fighting game, and it's very, very easy to get a mainstream audience involved in that. And I think they can quickly recognize the intensity and everything else behind that. And then once they understand that, if they're interested enough, they're going to kind of follow through and learn how the players are manipulating the characters on screen. So fighting games probably have a little bit of an edge on that. But at the end of the day, people are going to watch what they like. So if someone is interested in the weird looking avatars on screen in StarCraft 2, then they might be interested in that. But if that's something that is too complex and it puts them off, they might just go the way of the fighting games.
Yeah, that's interesting to look at the accessibility in terms of each one to see what they're like.
Exactly, exactly.
So, JP, switching gears here, you have your role play series on your YouTube channel, where you look at a number of different tabletop games like Dungeons and Dragons, Dark Heresy, Warhammer 40k, and so that obviously get together a group of people and to set even just setting up the campaign must take quite a bit of organization. So, what was the inspiration for that?
Um, I guess the inspiration for that was that one of the things that I have, I guess, always been good at is getting people together and getting them to kind of work, whether it's 5 or 6 people, starting back from the days of ArenaCast, which was my WoW podcast, which then led on to State of the Game, and I think after 3 or 4 years of all that, I'm quickly able to get people all in a same quote unquote room, a Skype call basically, and kind of deal with that. And a lot of the people that is on the show or that are on role play are people that I've worked with from the esports scenes. I know that they're capable of setting up a Skype call and jumping onto a video call, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of the inspiration for that, I guess it probably comes down to the Acquisitions Incorporated, which is the Penny Arcade live show that they put on every year. I guess it's twice a year now at PAX Prime and PAX East. And I looked at that and I saw how entertained I was by that, and decided, why not stream a D&D game? I had played once in high school, but I wasn't serious, and it was only a single night, and it was kind of a one-off deal that I was actually not interested in at the time. And after not working in MLG for about 4 months, I really wasn't doing anything and just kind of living off savings. And I think it was Total Biscuit actually messaged me and was just kind of like, "What the fuck are you doing? Like, hurry up and make content. You're just kind of just wasting away." And that kind of lit the fire under my ass, and I ended up messaging Ryan. Was the first person I messaged, who's known as Ryzilla or Breger on Roleplay, on the original Roleplay, and said like, "Hey, do you want to play D&D? It might be fun." And right after he was like, "Yeah, I'm totally down." I messaged Jen. She was the second person in. Jeff saw us talking about it on Twitter, and he basically he invited himself in, but he was already going to be invited because I knew him so well from the State of the Game days. So that was a no-brainer. And then we had to find a DM, which was kind of the last part. And luckily we found Neil, simply from a tweet just saying, "Hey, we're looking for DMs. If anyone out there wants to DM a friendly game and give it a test, we'll see how it goes." We did the first game off stream. I don't think it's recorded. If it is, I might put that up one day, if I can find it. I don't think it was recorded though. And it all went pretty well. So we decided that next week to actually just stream it. And I guess 400 or so hours down the line, with 5 role play shows or 4 role play shows, it's still a thing, and we're still enjoying it. So we'll just keep doing that as long as everyone else enjoys it.
So each game is completely different with the rules and how they're structured. But is there like an average campaign length that you have when you can say, right, we've finished this particular area and move on to something else?
I think that the line for when does a campaign end really goes down or comes down to like, when are the players not having fun? I don't think we really met, or when is the entire party killed? That's also another one, which is what happened with the original show that was just simply called Roleplay. When spoilers, the entire party died, and we decided to kind of move forward with the setting. All the other shows are kind of just going forward in the same campaign, and the story never really stops. I mean, you'll have like different cliffhangers and different stopping points with maybe a story arc, but the players are always going to persist and always move forward, unless they don't want to, and that's totally up to the players. But the DM's job is to always continue moving forward and always give them a goal. And I think the only show the only show that kind of goes away from this method is R&D, where Steven, the DM, Steven Lumpkin, schedules out the campaigns to really last for 6 to 8 weeks. And if we want to go a little bit longer or go a little bit shorter, then he'll adapt as needed. And we've done a 6 week campaign. We've done I think a 9 week campaign, and the current one, Numenera with Jesse Cox, is probably going to be around 10. At least that's the plan. But we'll see what actually happens. You never really know how players are going to react or to a certain situation. So it might end pretty soon, or it might end further down the line. You never really know. The nice thing is that the story is always going to be interesting. At least that's the hope, that's the goal, and that people are always going to be entertained. Which, again, another goal and another hope.
Now, are these mostly cooperative campaigns versus more so than competitive ones?
Yeah, I would definitely say that the players are working together for a common goal. Sometimes when we do a one shot, which is a 4 hour campaign or a 5 hour campaign, the players will be a little bit more PvP biased, where they'll just attack another player, which is totally fine. But one of the kind of, I guess, tenets of playing D&D, if you want to be an asshole, you attack your players, which is probably one of the dickest things you can do when it comes to traditional RPGs, because here's something that people have spent a lot of time and effort on building a character and making the backstory and perhaps playing the character, and you're just going and saying, no, I'm going to kill you right now and destroy all that. It has its time and it has its place story-wise, but it's a really asshole-ish way to play. And I think that most people I would hope that all the members of Roleplay won't ever go down that path. And if they do, it's going to be destroying a lot of the fun for people on the show.
So in those scenarios that they say there's a potential for like trust issues, but are there ever any situations where, like, if you're you're using dice and someone can be like, oh, 6 again? Is there any way to verify that everyone's playing on equal footing?
I mean, not really. You kind of just have to hope, and I think that the people that are on Roleplay, I've known them either through a professional or through a friendly relationship long enough that I would never, or they would never, do something like that. But you always kind of question in the back of your mind when Neil has or at least I do, when Neil hides his roles in Roleplay, like, did he actually just roll that, or is he just making it up? And 100% he's actually really rolling that, but you always think, like, I bet you he just made that up to spite me. Those thoughts always kind of cross my mind, but there's never any truth to them.
So, JP, what do you have in terms of future projects down the pipeline?
Well, I guess the first thing is I need to hurry up and get a website. I've been working on that for 6 months, and we're going to be putting out something that's much more basic than what I had originally intended. But it'll serve its purpose, and it'll get rid of the @me bot in a channel, which is probably at like 60,000 requests now in the past 6 months of people spamming Roleplay to try to figure out the time. So I'm looking to facilitate that a little bit better, or facilitate times and the information a little bit better for fans of the show. I'd like to do a little bit more like live stuff, something at PAX. We're doing a PAX panel this year, but it's not going to be a live show or anything. It's with Adam, myself, Wheat, and the co-creator of Roll20, which is the system that we use for all of our roles on all the roleplay shows, Nolan. And it's going to be about kind of like how you can digitize your RPGs. I would like to do something like an Acquisitions Incorporated, but I always struggle with the idea of, is that something I want to do at a PAX when, Acquisitions Incorporated already exists? I don't want to be someone that looks like an impersonator or someone trying to rip them off at their very own show. So we'll see. Maybe I host that somewhere. We did a recent show at MLG Anaheim, and I thought it went all right. There was definitely a huge learning process there, and I learned a lot, and I think everyone else learned a lot on how we can better that moving forward. That might be something that shows up at future MLGs. We'll see. And then I guess kind of super long term, there's definitely a lot of ideas floating around in my head for new campaigns and new one-shots. Nothing set in stone just yet. I don't really have any ideas. And I think it would be cool to one thing that I always see with the subreddit and with the general community is people start watching role play and their immediate question is how can I play this or how can I get involved and do something similar. So I want to try and provide a place for people that are interested in doing something like that to be able to meet up and to be able to find groups to play with and I guess find a place where they feel like they can be accepted and be interested and everyone can kind of have the same goal of wanting to play something like that. So further down the line, that might be something that I try to do. We'll just see how that goes. It's definitely a process that is going to be pretty involved and take a lot of resources, but we'll see how it goes. And that's just super down the line. I have no plans right now of doing anything along those lines.
Well, I look forward to seeing it when you eventually get those things going.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. It should be a lot of fun. I just worry that I get worried talking about stuff like that openly because then people start to accept it. That's why I've been pretty quiet on the website front for the past couple of months because people start expecting that, and the timetable for things like that is who knows, who knows when it'll actually be completed or even be started on. So we'll see.
Cool. So, JP, I'm going to ask you a question which I ask everyone who comes on here, and that is, if a game developer were to come to you and say, JP, you can create whatever video game you like, what would it be and why?
Probably be a super sandbox MMO where you would have kind of I guess the basis of it would be something like Ultima Online, something that they're kind of doing with Arcade, but also have the DayZ world in it, where you're always kind of fighting against yourself, and there's people that are coming to rob you and steal things from you. But I do enjoy the idea of a super sandboxed RPG with fantasy, with not super high fantasy, but some light fantasy thrown in. And it would just be kind of whatever people want to do. I think that right now you're seeing a lot of game companies and games out there that are giving the tools to players and allowing the players I guess the Minecraft age, right, where the players can create whatever the hell they want. And I think for me that's where a lot of my interests lie right now is in those situations and creating those types of situations. That is always going to be a lot more fun to me.
So something along the lines of, say, Project Sparks.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I've played that somewhat. I think that it definitely has its not limits, but there are things that I'm less interested in when it comes to that. But I think that's still in beta from what I remember. I've only checked it out a little bit. But that's super sandboxy. I mean, that's allow players to basically create the entire world, right? I would say that in a game that if I was creating something like that, I would have a world out there that players can manipulate, but they can't basically build it themselves. I think that takes it a little bit too far.
So, JP, what do you have to say to all of the fans who've known you from your esports blogging days and casting, and to who, and also those who come for the role play? What do you have to say to everyone who's followed you so far?
Well, just first off, thanks. I get people in the channel every now and then that say they've been following what I do since the ArenaCast days, which was 4 or 5 years ago, and that's incredible to me. I think there was a subscriber that was asking yesterday if there's any perks for being subscribed for a year straight, and there's not. But for people to have done that is incredible to me. I wake up every day and kind of knock on my bedpost just to make sure that I'm not dreaming, because I'm definitely in my eyes living the dream. Like I wake up and stream all day, and then I go and play Dungeons and Dragons, and that's my job. That's the world that I live in. So I could not be more grateful to all the fans for allowing me to do what I do and enjoy what I do. As a content creator, that's what you hope for. That's what you strive for, is to have an involved community. And I think the roleplay community is one of the best on the internet. I could not ask for anything more from you guys. So thank you so much for allowing me to do what I'm doing.
Awesome stuff. So, JP, where can we find you on the internet?
Well, you can just basically go to itmejp.com. It'll throw you over to my Twitch. From there, you can find my YouTube. It's all /itmejp, whether it's Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch. It's all the same. So I think if you actually just type itmejp into Google, it'll actually link to all that stuff as well. I'm lucky enough to not have to fight other people for that moniker. So just check me out on the Google, I guess.
And I'll put a number of those links in the description below this video if you would like to check those out.
Fantastic.
So, JP, it's been really great talking to you today, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Patrick. I'm always on the other side of the microphone doing the interviews, so for me, it's a thrill when I don't have to prepare questions, and rather I can just answer them.